Clara Bellamy did not flinch when Walter Grayson lined her and her sisters up in front of the entire town like livestock at a county fair. She had buried her flinching years ago, right alongside every other soft thing she'd allowed herself to feel. She stood with her spine straight and her hands folded and her eyes forward while Grayson turned to the crowd and said the words she would hear in her sleep for the rest of her life. "Gentlemen," he said, sweeping one fat hand toward the three of them like he was presenting merchandise. "Choose any daughter you want. If this story already has its hooks in you, please subscribe to this channel right now and follow Clara's story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back inside that trading post and find out what happens when the wrong man walks through the door at exactly the right moment." The morning it happened, Clara had told herself it was going to be fine. She had said it out loud, standing at the wash basin before dawn, looking at her own reflection in the small cracked mirror that had hung in the Bellamy farmhouse since before she was born. She had said it the way she said most necessary things quietly, without drama, like a fact she was deciding to make true through sheer force of will. It is going to be fine. She had been saying that for 3 years. Since the morning they found their father at the base of the barn ladder, his neck broken, the frost still hard on the ground. Since the morning she sat down with his ledger and discovered that the debt to Walter Grayson was not the manageable figure her father had always described, but something 3 times larger. Something that had been quietly compounding interest for years, like a wound nobody had bothered to bandage. She had said it through 2 failed harvests and 1 cattle sickness that took 11 animals in a single week. She had said it through the looks in town, through the letters from Grayson's office, through the nights she sat at the kitchen table after her sisters were asleep and did the math over and over and kept arriving at the same answer. It is going to be fine, was the story Clara told herself, because the alternative was a story she could not afford to live inside. She dressed her sisters that morning with the careful attention of someone preparing for something important and possibly dangerous. Dora's good blue dress, May's pressed white collar. Her own brown prairie dress, plain as always, let out twice at the seams in the years since her mother had made it. "You're quiet," Dora said. "I'm thinking Clara." Dora caught her arm. "What does he actually want?" "Yes, you do." Dora's eyes were sharp. Pretty girls often let people assume they weren't watching carefully. Clara had noticed. Dora was always watching. "You've known for a week." "That's why you haven't slept." Clara looked at her sister for a moment. Then she said, "We're going to go in there and hear him out, and keep our heads. Whatever he proposes, we do not agree to anything on the spot. We ask for time, and if he won't give us time, then we figure out the next thing." She squeezed Dora's hand once hard. "One thing at a time, all right?" Dora nodded. She didn't look convinced. But she put on her hat and she didn't ask any more questions, and that was enough. The ride into Harlan Creek took 40 minutes by wagon. Clara drove. The morning was clear and hot already, the kind of August morning that promised no relief by afternoon, and the road into town was dry and rutted and empty in both directions. May sat between them and did not speak. May had barely spoken since their father died. She had taken the grief and folded it somewhere so deep inside herself that Clara sometimes worried it had never found a way out. "May," Clara said, "about halfway to town, I know," May said. She was looking straight ahead. "I'm all right. I didn't ask." Yura almost smiled. Almost. Harlan Creek materialized out of the flat distance the way small frontier towns always did: first the water tower, then the church steeple, then the rooftops, then the main street, filling in detail by detail until suddenly they were in it. The trading post sat on the south corner, the largest building on the block, its sign freshly painted the way everything Grayson owned was freshly painted. The wagon lot outside had more horses tied to it than Clara expected on a Tuesday morning. That was the first wrong thing. She tied their own horse to the far post and helped May down and said nothing about the horses. But she counted them. 12, 13, and she recognized several of them, the brown gelding that belonged to Judge Alderton's clerk, the pair of matched bays that pulled the finance board president's carriage. This was not a private meeting. She walked through the door of the trading post with her sisters behind her and felt the room before she fully saw it, the particular pressure of a crowd that has been waiting, the cessation of low conversations, the collective turning of faces. Men she recognized from church, from the feed store, from the social hall where she had never quite been invited to sit. Women who smiled warmly at Dora and looked past Clara as though she were furniture. Two men she knew served on the county finance board, standing near the back with the careful expressions of officials who have agreed to witness something. Walter Grayson stood behind his counter, wide, well-fed, gray-bearded, wearing a good wool vest with a pocket watch chain catching the light. He smiled when she walked in. "Miss Bellamy," he said. "And your lovely sisters. Thank you so much for coming." Clara looked at the room. She looked at it carefully, the way she looked at everything, cataloging, assessing, deciding what she was actually dealing with. Then she looked back at Grayson. "You said this was a meeting to discuss a solution," she said. "You didn't mention it was a public event. I find that some matters are best handled with community witnesses," Grayson said smoothly. "Keeps everything above board." He spread his hands, a generous open gesture. "Now, I've given your family's situation a great deal of thought. The debt is substantial. We all know that, and I consider myself a compassionate man. I have no interest in seeing 3 young women put out on the road." "Then give us an extension," Clara said. 60 days. We can bring the cattle numbers up before the fall market." Grayson shook his head, slowly, sorrowfully, the headshake of a man who had rehearsed his sorrow in advance. "The markets are soft, Clara. 60 days won't save an operation that's been declining for 3 years. I think in your heart you know that. Then what are you proposing?" He looked at her, and in that look, Clara felt the entire shape of what was about to happen, the way you sometimes feel weather changing before you can see it in the sky. "I have several gentlemen in this county," Grayson said, "who are in need of capable wives. Good women, hard-working women who understand ranch life and know how to build a home." He paused. "Let it sit. I am prepared to clear your family's debt, every dollar, completely in exchange for one of your sisters agreeing to a suitable match." The room did not go silent all at once. It went quiet in stages, conversations dying out one by one until there was nothing left but the sound of August heat pressing against the windows. Clara stood very still. She had known. She had known for a week, the way Dora said. But knowing a thing in the dark at the kitchen table and hearing it said aloud in a room full of witnesses were 2 entirely different experiences. And for a single unguarded moment she felt the full weight of it land on her chest like something physical. Then she put it away, filed it somewhere, kept her face where it was. "You're proposing," she said, "to cancel a financial debt in exchange for a woman." "I'm proposing a practical arrangement. Which men?" Her voice was flat. "Controlled. Name them." Grayson named 3. She knew all of them. The room knew all of them. She watched the faces of the women in the crowd. When he said the second name, she saw 2 of them exchange a look, quick and private, the look that passes between women who know something and are not going to say it out loud in a room full of men. "No," Clara said. Grayson's smile stayed exactly where it was. "Miss Bellamy, no." She said it again, quieter. The quiet made it heavier. "We will find another way." "I'm afraid there is no other way." The smile finally shifted, not gone, but recalibrated. Thinner, more honest. "The note comes due at the end of this month. If it's not settled in full, I am legally entitled to take the property. The livestock, the equipment, the land." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm trying to help you, Clara. I hope you understand that." The silence in the room had changed texture. It was no longer the silence of people waiting to be entertained. It was the silence of people watching an animal that has run out of room to run. Dora's hand found Clara's arm. Clara hit the slight trembling and made herself stay still so her sister could borrow whatever stillness she had left. Then a voice came from the back of the room. Which families? It was not loud. It had the quality of a voice that had never needed to be loud to be heard, level and unhurried, and with an edge underneath it like a good blade kept inside a plain scabbard. Clara turned. She hadn't noticed him. He'd been positioned beside a tall shelf of dry goods, arms crossed, hat on, watching the whole proceeding, with an expression that gave away almost nothing because Clara, who had been reading rooms her whole life, caught something in it. Not outrage. Something colder and more considered than outrage. The look of a man who has watched something proceed to its inevitable conclusion and has decided he has seen enough. He was tall, lean in the way that came from years of physical work, not from any deliberate attention to it. Dark hair silvering at the temples, a plain work coat. No tie, hands that had clearly spent significant time on the wrong end of a fence post. He wasn't looking at Dora. He was looking at Clara. Nathaniel. Grayson's voice had shifted slightly, the warmth turned down a degree. This is a private matter. You have 15 people in your store, the man said. He pushed off the shelf and moved through the room with the unhurried ease of someone who has never felt compelled to rush toward anything. He stopped about 6 feet from the counter. I'll ask again, Walter. Which families are on your list? The arrangements I've made are between myself and the families involved. Are they? It wasn't a question. He looked at the room slowly, at the finance board members, at the witnesses, at the assembled machinery of what Grayson had constructed here. Because from where I was standing, it looked like you just told 3 women in front of a room full of people that you'll clear their debt if one of them marries off your list. He paused. I want to make sure I understood that correctly. Grayson's jaw shifted. You're characterizing it in the most uncharitable. I'm characterizing it in the most accurate possible way. He turned to Clara. He looked at her directly, not at May. At Clara, with the same full, undeflected attention he'd been giving Grayson, like she was the person in the room most worth looking at. Ma'am, he said, my name is Nathaniel Crowe. I have a ranch about 4 miles east. I apologize for what you just walked into. That was wrong, and it shouldn't have happened. Clara looked at him. She was not a woman who was easily surprised she had trained that out of herself, the way you train a horse past a fear, through enough repeated exposure that the thing stopped having power. But she was surprised now, not by the apology, by the way he delivered it directly, without performance, without the particular self-congratulatory quality that characterized men who did good things in public and wanted credit for the doing. He looked like a man who was simply stating a fact. I appreciate that, she said carefully. He nodded once. Turned back to Grayson. The debt, he said. What's the total? Grayson blinked. It was the first time Clara had seen him blink in surprise. I beg your. What does the family owe? The full number, including whatever interest you've applied. That information is between myself and Walter. Nathaniel's voice hadn't changed once. Same level, same unhurried wait. You just proposed to settle it in exchange for a woman. I think that makes it a number worth saying out loud. Grayson named the figure. His face had gone careful and very still. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Clara watched him do the arithmetic behind his eyes, the brief internal calculation of a man who actually had the resources and was deciding whether to use them. I'll cover it, he said. The room went absolutely still. Clara went still. May made a small sound beside her that she cut off immediately. Grayson started. Cover it. The whole amount. Nathaniel reached into his coat and produced a leather note case. You've got the finance board here. Draw up the transfer. We'll settle it today. Grayson stared at him. Something was happening behind his eyes, a rapid recalculation, a new set of moves being considered and discarded. Nathaniel, he said, and the warmth was entirely gone from his voice now, replaced by something that wanted to sound like reason and was actually something else. You don't know these women. You don't know their situation. This is a significant sum for an impulsive. It's not impulsive. Nathaniel put the note case on the counter. And I know enough. And what exactly do you expect in return? The question landed with its full implication, ugly and deliberate, and Clara watched several people in the room flinch from it. A man doesn't pay a debt that size without expecting something back. Nathaniel looked at him. The silence lasted exactly long enough to be uncomfortable. I run a working ranch, he said. I've been running it alone for 4 years. I need help, competent people willing to work for fair wages and honest terms. He looked at Clara. Housing, fair pay, the ability to manage the household and livestock operation alongside me. That's what I'm offering. That's what I expect back, he paused. Freely given. By people who choose it. The two words hung in the air, freely given, and Clara understood exactly why he had said them. Understood the deliberate precision of it. He was drawing a line between what Grayson had proposed and what he was proposing, and he was drawing it in front of witnesses. You're offering them employment, someone said from the crowd. Like they couldn't quite make the shape of it fit anything they recognized. And a home, Nathaniel said, until they're on their feet. Grayson's face had gone a shade that Clara associated with men being publicly outmaneuvered and knowing it. His voice, when it came, was measured in the way that very angry, controlled men measure their voices. This is highly irregular, Nathaniel. These women are virtual strangers to you. I have to wonder what you're actually. I know what you have to wonder, Nathaniel said. I don't particularly care. He looked at Clara, Miss Bellamy. This is your decision. Entirely yours. Take whatever time you need. Clara stood in the middle of Walter Grayson's trading post, with every person in the room watching her, and felt the full specific weight of the moment settle across her shoulders. She looked at Grayson, at his careful, patient face. At the list of names he had in his vest pocket, she knew. Men she'd been warned about by other women in the small coded language women used to warn each other. She looked at the finance board members, who were studying the floor. She looked at Nathaniel Crowe, who was looking back at her with the same direct, unperforming attention he had given her since he first turned around. What kind of work? She said. Something in his face shifted. Just slightly. Whatever the ranch needs. Livestock, cooking, records, repairs. Your call, what you take on. My sisters come with me. All 3 of you. That was never a question. She looked at him for 3 more seconds. She was looking for the hidden cost, the thing underneath the offer, the real price, the place where the trap was set. She was very good at finding those things. She had spent her whole life finding them. She didn't find one. All right, she said. We accept. The sound that went through the room was not applause and not disapproval. It was the particular communal exhale of 30 people watching something happen that they hadn't predicted, recalibrating, beginning to have opinions about it. Grayson looked at Nathaniel with an expression that had finished pretending to be anything other than what it was. You're making a mistake, he said, quiet, direct. The statement of a man delivering a promise, not a warning. Wouldn't be my first, Nathaniel said. He picked up his note case and turned to Clara, and there was something in the turn that was almost not quite, but almost the ghost of a smile. Whenever you're ready, ma'am. No rush. It took an hour to execute the paperwork. Grayson handled it with the mechanical efficiency of a man who has lost a battle and is already planning the war. Clara signed where she was told to sign and read every line before she signed it, which made the finance board members shift their weight and Grayson's clerk clear his throat twice, and she did not apologize for any of it. When she walked out of that trading post, her debt was gone, and her sisters were behind her, and a man she had met 45 minutes ago was loading her family's single trunk into his wagon. She stood in the August sun and felt nothing she could name yet. Not relief, not gratitude, not hope. Something more cautious than any of those. Something that had survived enough disappointments to know better than to open all the way before it had more information. Nathaniel helped May up onto the wagon seat one hand offered, released immediately when she was steady. No commentary, No production made of it, and then he went around to the front and untied his horse and climbed up and gathered the reins. He didn't look at the people watching from the sidewalk. He didn't perform anything for the crowd. Clara climbed into the back herself. Dora settled beside her. Dora said very low. "I know. We're out of that room," Clara said. "That's what we are right now. The rest we figure out as it comes." The wagon moved. Harlan Creek passed on both sides. Clara sat with her back straight and looked straight ahead and felt the eyes of the town on them like a physical thing, the accumulated weight of every judgment being rapidly formed and refined and whispered to the nearest person. She heard a woman say it as they passed. Didn't catch all of it. Just the shape of it, the particular cadence that goes with a certain kind of laugh when a certain kind of woman is the subject. She had heard that cadence since she was 12 years old. She knew exactly what sentence fit inside it without needing to hear the words. She kept her eyes forward, her hands in her lap, her face where she'd put it. What she did not allow herself was the thing she felt underneath all of it, the specific, particular hurt of being a person who has done everything right and still moves through the world being assessed and found wanting before she has spoken a single word. The hurt of being sized up and dismissed while standing in a room. The hurt of knowing that the woman who just laughed had looked at her and seen a body and a dress and made a complete decision about a human life in under 2 seconds. She did not allow it because it cost too much to feel and she needed everything she had. The Crowe Ranch sat at the edge of a wide valley backed by a pine ridge. It came into view gradually, the roofline first, then the barn, then the fencing, then the whole of it resolving into something solid and functional and quiet. A dozen cattle in the pasture, a henhouse, a kitchen garden that had clearly been weeded recently by someone who knew what they were doing. Nathaniel pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard and climbed down and looked at the ranch with an expression. Clara couldn't immediately read the look of a man seeing his own home through someone else's eyes for the first time in a long time. It's not apologetic, just honest. "It's standing," Clara said. He looked at her brief. Then he said, "Come on, I'll show you the house." She followed him inside. It was a man's house, clean in the functional way, everything put away, nothing out of place, nothing wasted. But no curtains, no pictures. The kitchen was well supplied and completely impersonal, like a room that had been designed to perform its function and had never been asked to do anything more than that. 2 bedrooms, Nathaniel said. He moved through the space efficiently, pointing. "I take the small one. The 3 of you take the large one. Washroom off the back. Kitchen stocked. Henhouse has 20 birds. Barn rosters posted on the wall inside the door. Cattle need checking morning and evening. I do the morning. You do the evening if that suits." Clara moved through the house behind him and took in everything he said and filed it alongside everything she observed. The quality of the wood stove maintained, not neglected. The straightness of the shelving built by someone who measured twice. The age of the house versus the condition of its bones. "What do you grow?" she asked. "Cattle, mainly. Root vegetables. I've been meaning to expand the kitchen garden, but I haven't had." He stopped. "Time," Clara said. "Help," he said. He looked at the garden through the back window. 2 sets of hands. That's what most of this place needs. Clara looked at the garden. She looked at the size of it, the layout, the soil condition she could assess from here. She thought about what it could produce by fall if someone started immediately. "I can do that," she said. He looked at her for a moment in the particular way she was starting to recognize, full attention, held briefly, then released. "All right," he said. "Just that. That first supper, she made what she could from what was there. Salt pork and beans and cornbread. Nothing she would have chosen to make for strangers. But she made it well, and she made enough, and she brought it to the table without ceremony." Nathaniel sat with them. She hadn't been certain he would. She'd half expected him to take a plate to the smaller bedroom, to establish the arrangement's separateness in a way that would have told her something important about what she'd agreed to. He sat at the table. He passed the cornbread to May before serving himself, which was not a thing she'd expected, and which she noted precisely. They ate in the quiet that descends when four people who don't yet know each other are trying to figure out the shape of what they're in. It was May who broke it. "How long have you been here?" she asked. It came out before she could stop it, the first complete sentence Clara had heard her say in weeks. Nathaniel looked up. He didn't seem startled by the question. He said, "Alone the whole time?" "May," Clara said. "It's all right." He set down his fork. His voice was the same level, unhurried, but Clara heard some sick silence around the next words before he said them. "The last 4 years alone. My wife passed before that. Fever, in the winter." A pause, it went fast. May looked at him with her wide dark eyes that absorbed everything. "I'm sorry," she said. "Thank you."
Doris, is that why you came today?
"Because you know what it's like to have something taken." The table went very still. Clara looked at her sister. Dora was watching Nathaniel with the direct, uncalculating gaze of someone who has decided that the situation is too important for social caution. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. He looked at his plate. Then he looked up and said, "I came because what was happening in that room was wrong." "And sometimes that's enough of a reason." "Most men don't think that's enough," Dora said. "I know," he said. He picked up his fork. "That doesn't make it insufficient." The supper ended without ceremony. Clara cleaned up. Nathaniel went out to check the barn. May helped dry the dishes and Dora put things away, and the ordinary mechanics of a shared household settled into the kitchen the way they do quietly, without announcement, through the simplification of necessary tasks. Later, after her sisters were in bed, Clara sat at the kitchen table, with the account ledger Nathaniel had left on the shelf with the quiet implication that she might want to look at it. She looked at it. All of it: the cattle records, the supply accounts, the maintenance log, the crop notes. She looked at them the way she looked at everything, carefully and completely, and she began to see the shape of what this ranch was and what it could be, and where the 4 years of a man working alone had started to show in the gaps. She also looked for the thing that was wrong. She was always looking for the thing that was wrong. The hidden clause, the real price, the place where the kindness revealed its cost. She didn't find it. That was what kept her at the table longest, not the numbers, which were manageable, but the absence of what she'd been bracing for. The arrangement was what he'd said it was. The house was what he'd shown her. The supper had been what it appeared to be 4 people eating together, because they were sharing a table. There was no trap she could find, which meant either she was missing it, or there wasn't one. She did not know yet which it was. She would have to keep watching. She put the ledger down and looked at the kitchen, the plain, curtainless, impersonal room that had been running on pure function for 4 years and had clearly, at some earlier point in its history, been something more than that. There were small architectural details that someone had thought to include when the house was built: the curve of the window frame, the notching in the shelving, the way the back door was positioned to catch the afternoon light. Whoever had designed this house had expected it to be a home. Something had happened, and then it had become just a house. Clara sat in the silence of it and thought about the woman who had died in the winter 4 years ago, and the man who had kept maintaining the barn and the cattle and the supply accounts ever since. In a house he had let go impersonal because impersonal was survivable. She thought about what it would take to be that woman. To have built something with someone, and then have it become just the work, just the going through of motions, just the survival. She understood survival. She had been doing it for 3 years. She had not yet decided what she thought about this man. She had not yet decided what she thought about any of this. But she sat in his kitchen in the dark and she understood something about him that she couldn't have put into a sentence yet, and she filed it away alongside everything else. Outside, the August night pressed down warm and full of stars, and somewhere in the barn she could hear the quiet settling sounds of cattle at rest. And in his big white house on the north end of Harlan Creek, Walter Grayson sat at his desk and read back over the transfer papers that had been filed that afternoon, and his expression did not change, and his pen did not stop moving. He had already written 3 letters by midnight. He had already sent 2 of them. The letters went out before the ink was dry on the transfer papers. Clara didn't know that yet. She was 3 days into the Crowe Ranch, learning the weight of a new morning routine, the henhouse first, then the kitchen fire, then the cattle check at dusk, and she was too busy surviving the present to worry about what was being constructed against her in town. That would come later. Everything Grayson did came later, and quietly, and by the time you felt it, you were already inside it. The first sign was small enough that she almost missed it. She had driven the supply wagon into Harlan Creek on the 4th day, alone, because Nathaniel had a fence line down on the east pasture, and Dora had the kitchen, and May was finally, tentatively, beginning to tend the garden with the focused attention of someone who needed something living to care for. Clara had the list. She had the ranch's account at the general store, which Nathaniel had added her name to the morning after they arrived quietly, without announcement. Just a note to the shopkeeper that Miss Bellamy's signature was good on the account, the same as his own. She had noticed that, filed it away with everything else she was filing. The general store was run by a man named Pruitt, who had always been civil to her in the years she'd traded there on behalf of the Bellamy Ranch. Civil in the way that didn't cost anything, the nod, the correct change, the items retrieved from the back shelf without being asked twice. Not warm, not unkind, just transactional. That morning he was something different. She didn't identify it immediately. She placed her order and he filled it, and the mechanics of the exchange proceeded normally. It was only when she was stacking the items into the wagon that she realized he hadn't spoken a single word beyond the necessary minimums. No weather comment, no inquiry after the ranch, not even the standard acknowledgement that her credit was in order. She turned around. Pruitt was already back behind his counter, not looking at her. "Mr. Pruitt," she said. He looked up. His expression was the specific blankness of a man who has decided something and is trying not to show the decision on his face. "Something wrong with the order?" he asked. "No," Clara said. "Is something wrong with you?" A pause. Very short. "No, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. The blankness held. "All right," she said. She picked up the last box. "Good day." She drove back to the ranch and said nothing about it. But she thought about it for the rest of that day, the precise texture of Pruitt's blankness, the careful distance of it, the sense that he was maintaining an established position rather than reacting to something she'd done. That was not the blankness of a man who had nothing to say. That was the blankness of a man who had been told to say nothing. Nathaniel came in from the fence line at dusk, with dried mud on his boots and a cut along his left forearm that he was ignoring in the particular way men ignore things they consider beneath acknowledgement. "You need that looked at," Clara said. He glanced at the arm. "It's fine, it's not fine. Sit down." He looked at her. She looked back. Something passed between them, a brief negotiation, and then he sat down at the kitchen table, and she cleaned and bandaged the cut with the same practical efficiency she brought to everything, and he let her, which she was learning, was its own kind of statement from this man. "Something happened in town," he said. It wasn't a question. She stopped. "Why do you say that?" "Because you've been thinking hard about something, since you got back, and you haven't said what it is." She finished tying off the bandage and sat back. "Pruitt," she said. He was different. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. His face did not change, but his jaw moved in a way that told her he was not surprised. "You knew," she said. "I suspected." He looked at his hands on the table. "Grayson has relationships with most of the businesses in this county. He's been building them for 20 years, and now he's using them." "Probably, against you or against me." Nathaniel looked up at her. "Both," he said. "But the louder noise will be about you." Clara absorbed this. She absorbed it the way she absorbed most difficult things fully, without flinching away, without pretending it wasn't the shape it was. What will he say? That you manipulated me. That you took advantage of a grieving widower. He said it plainly, without softening it, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. That you and your sisters came here under false pretenses, and that the whole arrangement is inappropriate and probably immoral. And people will believe that. Some of them already do, he said. Because it's easier to believe than the truth. What is the truth? He looked at her for a long moment. That I walked into that trading post and saw something worth protecting, he said. And I made a decision. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara picked up the bandage scraps and took them to the waste bin. She kept her back to him for a moment, not from feeling, but because she needed a second to put the feeling to somewhere tangible before she turned around. I'm not going to let him run me out, she said. Her voice was steady. I want you to know that. I know it, Nathaniel said. I knew it in that trading post. She turned around. How? Because when he named the amount, he said, you didn't look at the door. Most people look at the door when a number that size gets said out loud. You looked straight at him. He paused. I thought there's somebody who knows how to stand in a hard place. She didn't know what to do with that, so she put it away and picked up the supper preparations, and they didn't speak about it again that night. But she carried it with her, and she noticed when she went to bed that she was sleeping slightly better than she had in 3 years. The second sign came 6 days later and was considerably less subtle. 2 ranch hands arrived on a Thursday morning, men Nathaniel had employed for years, he told her. Reliable hands who came twice a week to help with the heavier work. Their names were Boone and Calhoun, and they were the kind of men who did not have much to say before noon. Boone was polite. Calhoun was not impolite, which was different. He did his work and spoke when spoken to, and looked at Clara with the careful neutrality of a man who has received information about her from somewhere else and is deciding how much weight to give it. By mid-morning, she had identified the quality of his neutrality, and she understood what it meant. She went to find Nathaniel at the north fence. Calhoun, she said, without preamble. Nathaniel looked up from the post he was setting. What about him? Someone's been talking to him. Nathaniel drove the post into the ground with one firm push. Looked at it. What makes you say that? Because he keeps looking at me the way people look at something they've been told is dangerous, she said. He's deciding whether the information he received matches what he's actually seeing. And does it? No, she said, but that won't matter if the information keeps coming. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. He pulled on the post to test it, let go, brushed his hands off. I'll talk to him. He looked at her. If you talk to him, it confirms that there's something to talk about, she said. Let me handle it, her face. How? By being exactly what I am, she said. Consistently, until he can't reconcile what he was told with what he's actually seeing. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment with that particular full attention expression she was learning, to read the one that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite surprise, but occupied some territory between the two. All right, he said. She went back to the house and made lunch for 4 and brought it out to where all of them were working, and she included Calhoun without comment and without performance. And she talked to him about the fence line and the cattle weight and the east pasture rotation the same way she talked to Boone. And she did not acknowledge the invisible verdict he had arrived with, and she did not try to argue against it. By the end of the day, Calhoun had begun answering her questions in full sentences. She counted that as a beginning. What she didn't count on was Dora. She should have. She knew her sister. But she had been so focused on managing the external pressure, Grayson's invisible campaign, the shifting quality of the town's attention, the slow work of establishing herself in the ranch's daily operation, that she hadn't left enough attention for what was happening inside the house. She found out at the end of the second week, when she came in from the evening cattle check and found Dora sitting at the kitchen table with the expression of someone who has been holding a thing for too long and has decided it has to come out now, regardless of the timing. Clara, Dora said, nothing happened. I need to tell you something. Dora's hands were folded on the table. She had their mother's hands, narrow, precise. There was a man in town today. When May and I went for the thread, Clara set down her hat. What man? He didn't give a name. He came up to us near the dry goods store, and he was very polite about it, which was the worst part. He said he was concerned about our welfare. She paused. He said that people in town were worried that Mr. Crowe had taken advantage of our situation, that the arrangement wasn't what it appeared, that there were, he used the word, improprieties. Clara was very still. He told May. Dora said quietly that if we felt unsafe, there were people who would help us. That Mr. Grayson himself was prepared to intervene on our behalf. Grayson, Clara said. Yes, he sent a man to approach May. Dora's eyes were steady on hers. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Clara picked up her hat, put it back on, and said, "Where is she?" "In the garden. She's been there since we got back." Clara went through the back of the house and out the kitchen door, and she found May exactly where Dora said she would be, kneeling in the garden dirt in the long evening light, pulling weeds with the methodical intensity of someone who is doing something physical because the thing in their head needs to be somewhere other than their head. Clara kneeled down beside her. May didn't look up. "I didn't believe him," she said. "I know, he was trying to sound kind." That's what made it. She pulled a weed, let it go. That's what made it bad. He was very careful about seeming kind. Grayson always is. May sat back on her heels and finally looked at her. In the fading light, she looked very young. She had always been the youngest in the way that some youngest children were, not just in age, but in the particular openness of someone who had not yet developed all their armor. "Clara, are we safe here?" Clara looked at her sister. She looked at her, completely not calculating, not managing, just really looking at the person she had been protecting and providing for and carrying for 3 years, who was asking her a question she deserved a real answer to. "Yes," she said. "I believe we are." "You believe?" "You don't know." "I don't know anything for certain," Clara said. "I've been watching him for 2 weeks and I haven't found the thing that's wrong." "That doesn't mean there isn't one, but it means it isn't obvious, and in my experience, men who intend to hurt you make it obvious eventually whether they mean to or not." "He fixed my boot," she said. Clara blinked. "What?" "The left one. The sole was pulling away from the upper. I left it by the door 3 days ago, and I came down in the morning and it was sitting there mended." She paused. "I didn't ask him to." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I didn't ask him to," May said again, "and he didn't say anything about it. He just did it." Clara looked at the garden. At the neat rows May had been cultivating for 2 weeks, the herbs coming in along the south border the way Clara had suggested, the tomato seedlings she had transplanted from the wild ones growing along the fence. "I know," she said. "I know." She put her arm around her sister's shoulders and felt May lean into her the way she had since they were small, and they stayed like that in the garden for a while in the evening quiet. She went to find Nathaniel afterward. He was in the barn, which was where he went in the evenings when he wasn't needed in the house, not avoiding the house. She had come to understand, but giving them space in it. Giving them room to exist without being observed, which was its own kind of consideration. She stood in the barn doorway. "Grayson sent someone to talk to my sisters in town today," she said. Nathaniel went very still. He had been checking the saddle rigging on the far wall, and he stopped with his hands on the leather and didn't move for a moment. Then he turned around. His expression was something she hadn't seen from him before the containment had thinned. Not gone, but the thing underneath it was visible now, and it was not mild. "He approached May," Clara said, "on the street." "May." He said the name like he was confirming something. "The youngest." A pause. "Is she all right?" "She's shaken. She's steady. She's May." She watched him. "I want to know what he's capable of, Nathaniel. I need you to tell me what I'm actually dealing with. Not the general version, the specific one." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Sit down." She sat on the hay bale near the door. He stayed standing, but the distance between them changed, became something more direct. "I've known Walter Grayson for 12 years, he said. He bought his first parcel of land the year I arrived. I watched him work. He's patient, he builds slowly, and he doesn't overextend. When he moves against someone, he doesn't do it with noise. He does it with 100 small things that each look reasonable on their own. He makes you doubt what you're seeing. By the time you can name it clearly, you're already losing." "How does he do it specifically?" "Credit," Nathaniel said. "He tightens or extends credit based on who's cooperating with him. Rumor, he plants things and lets them grow. Association, he gets people to believe that being seen with you costs them something, so they pull away. And then, witnesses. He collects people who owe him, and when he needs a public statement that makes him look like the reasonable party, he has 20 people ready to give it." Clara was quiet, listening. "The letters he wrote the night of the transfer," Nathaniel continued. "I don't know what they said, but I know he wrote them." Boone saw his clerk writing out with 3 letters before dawn. "3 letters, Clara said, to the finance board, to the sheriff, and to someone else." Nathaniel looked at her. "Why do you say the sheriff?" "Because that's how a man like him constructs a legal problem, where there wasn't one," she said. "He needs the finance mechanism, the legal mechanism, and the social mechanism. 3 letters, 3 channels. The finance board questions the transfer. The sheriff starts hearing concerns about the arrangement. And the 3rd letter goes to someone who can make the social pressure real: a church elder, a women's committee, someone with a public platform." Nathaniel stared at her. "My father's ledger had 14 years of Grayson's interest calculations in it," she said. "I've had 3 years to study how he operates. I just didn't know the specific form it would take here." "You already knew what he was before we sat down in that trading post," Nathaniel said. "I knew what kind of man he was," she said. "I didn't know what moves he'd make. Now I'm starting to." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" "I want to stay ahead of him," she said, "and I need to know if you're prepared for what that means. Because if he's executing all 3 channels at once, the pressure on you is going to become significant. People you've done business with for years. You're standing in this community." "I know," he said. And I don't make decisions based on what's comfortable," he said. The directness of it was clean and simple, and she believed it because she had been watching him for 2 weeks, and she had never once seen him do anything based on comfort. "I make them based on what's right." He paused. "I made one in that trading post. I'm not undoing it because Walter Grayson is writing letters." Clara looked at him. She wanted to say something, she could feel it there, the shape of it, but she didn't have language for it yet, so she said, "All right," and stood up. "Clara," he said. She stopped. He was looking at her with that direct, quiet attention. "I want you to know something," he said, "and I want to say it plainly, not around the edges." A pause. "When I walked into that trading post, I saw a woman standing in an impossible situation who had not broken. I thought whoever that woman is, she deserves better than what's happening to her in this room. That's why I said what I said." He paused again. "It's not why I'm saying it now." "Not anymore." The barn was very quiet. "What changed?" she said. "I've been watching you for 2 weeks," he said. "The same way you've been watching me." She stood in the doorway of the barn and held that, and didn't say the thing that came up in her, because she wasn't ready for it, and she wasn't sure she could trust it, and she was still, underneath everything, a woman who had learned very young that hoping for a specific thing was the most efficient way to ensure its absence. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said. "Good night, Clara," he said. She walked back to the house in the dark, and she sat at the kitchen table with the account ledger, and she worked on the figures for the east pasture rotation until her eyes ached, and she did not think about the barn, or about what he had said in it, or about the way her name sounded in his voice. She thought about Grayson, and she started planning. The following Sunday, the Reverend of the Harlan Creek Church delivered a sermon about the sanctity of family arrangements and the dangers of circumstances that appeared generous but concealed ungodly intentions. He did not name anyone. He didn't need to. Every person in the pew knew exactly who he was describing and exactly what position they were expected to hold. Clara knew about it because Calhoun told her Monday morning. He came in for the week's first work session, and she could see from 20 feet away that he had something to say and wasn't certain whether to say it. "Calhoun," she said. "Ma'am, just tell me," he told her. His voice was gruff, and he looked at his boots for part of it, but he told her. He also told her that 3 people had come up to him after the service to ask about the arrangement at the ranch. And he told her this part clearly cost him something that he had told them the truth. Which was, Clara said, "That you run that place honest," Calhoun said. "That I've never seen anything irregular, that Miss Dora and Miss May are there of their own free will and doing fine." He paused. "And that anyone who's got a question about Nathaniel Crowe's character has never done business with him, because I have, and that's all I need to know." Clara looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, still looking at his boots. "Yes, ma'am." She told Nathaniel about the sermon that evening. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, with the account ledger between them, and she said it plain. His jaw tightened, just barely. The Reverend. He was careful not to name anyone. "He wouldn't," Nathaniel said. "He never does. It's cleaner that way." He sat back. "This is moving faster than I expected." "Grayson is impatient," Clara said. "Which means he feels he's losing something. That's useful." "How is it useful? Because impatient men make mistakes," she said. "He was careful for 20 years, and then he miscalculated with us. He underestimated what you'd do in that trading post. He's been trying to correct for that ever since, and he's doing it too fast." She looked at the ledger. "I've been going through the supply accounts. The dates on some of these interest entries from when my father was alive, they don't match the terms of the original note." Nathaniel went still. "Grayson modified the debt after it was issued," she said. "The interest rate changed twice in the first year. That's not in the original note. It's in the ledger entries. But he used 2 different notations that most people wouldn't connect as significant." She slid the page toward him. He leaned forward and looked at it. She watched his face as he read it, the particular focused stillness of a man who is seeing something clearly for the first time. "This is fraud," he said. "I think it's fraud," Clara said. "I think a lawyer would find it's fraud. How long have you known?" "I suspected it 2 days after I arrived, and I've been building the case since." He looked up at her. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because suspicion isn't evidence," she said. "And because I needed to be certain before I said it to anyone, including you." She paused. "I'm certain now." He looked at her across the table in the lamplight, and the expression on his face had moved past the territory she'd seen before, past the directness, past the quiet consideration into something rawer and more honest that he didn't appear to be entirely in control of. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "Not yet. Let's deal with Grayson first." His jaw moved. He nodded. "Once," he said. "All right. What do you need?" "A lawyer," she said. "And I need him before Grayson knows we're looking." Nathaniel was already standing. "I know a man in Billings," he said. "He's good and he doesn't owe Grayson anything. I can ride out tomorrow." "Good." She began marking the relevant ledger pages. "I'll have everything organized before you leave." He moved to put on his coat and stopped. He stood with his back to her for a moment, and she watched the line of his shoulders, the contained, working man's posture, and she saw in it something she recognized. The particular stillness of someone holding something in that they are not yet ready to say. She recognized it because she was doing the same thing. He put on his coat. "I'll be back by Thursday," he said. "I'll be here." He went out. The door closed. The kitchen settled back into its lamplit quiet, and Clara turned to the ledger pages and began to work. And outside, down the valley road toward Harlan Creek, Walter Grayson's third letter arrived at its destination. and the man who received it read it twice, picked up his hat, and rode out before sunrise. The man who received Grayson's third letter was named Sheriff Dale Pruitt, no relation to the shopkeeper, though they shared the same careful blankness when it suited them. He rode into the Crowe Ranch on a Wednesday morning, 2 days before Nathaniel was due back from Billings, and Clara heard the horse in the yard before she saw him. She was at the kitchen table with the ledger pages spread in front of her, 3 weeks of careful documentation, every falsified interest entry flagged, every date discrepancy noted in her own clean hand alongside the original notation. She heard the horse, and she looked at the papers, and she made a decision in about 4 seconds. She stacked everything, put it in the flour tin on the second shelf, and put the lid on. Then she went to the door. Sheriff Pruitt was a lean man in his 50s with a weathered face, and the particular quality of stillness that some lawmen cultivated, not calm exactly, but the practiced appearance of calm. He had his hat in his hands when she opened the door. That was deliberate, she thought, the hat in the hands. The posture of a man making a social call. "Miss Bellamy," he said. "I apologize for coming unannounced, Sheriff," she said. "Mr. Crowe is away until Thursday. Is there something I can help you with?" "Actually," he said, "it's you I came to speak with." He glanced past her into the house. "May I come in?" She stepped back and let him in. She did not offer coffee. She sat at the kitchen table and folded her hands on top of it and waited, because she had learned from 27 years of watching people that the person who fills silence first is usually the person who is more uncomfortable with it. Pruitt sat across from her. He put his hat on the table. He looked at the kitchen, the plain, functional room, the empty shelves where she'd been working, and then he looked at her. "There have been some concerns raised," he said, "by members of this community." "About the nature of this arrangement." "Which members?" she said. "I'm not at liberty to Walter Grayson," she said. "Specifically." Pruitt's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. "Mr. Grayson has expressed concern, yes, as have others." "What is the concern precisely?" "That Mr. Crowe may have entered into this arrangement under circumstances that were not entirely voluntary." He paused. "That he was manipulated. That 3 women in a desperate situation may have used that desperation to take advantage of a grieving man's generosity." Clara looked at him. "Let me make sure I understand you," she said. "You are suggesting that Nathaniel Crowe, a man who has managed a ranch alone for 4 years, who runs his own financial accounts, who entered a trading post of his own volition and made a decision of his own free will in front of 30 witnesses, that man was manipulated by Miss Bellamy, by a woman he had never met before that morning. The concern is about the circumstances." "The circumstances," Clara said, "were that Walter Grayson lined me and my sisters up in front of a room full of people and told them to take their pick. Nathaniel Crowe objected to that. He offered an alternative. I accepted it." She kept her voice level and clean. "I am not certain which part of that sequence you believe I manipulated, but I am happy to clarify any specific point." Pruitt was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her with an expression that had become more attentive and less performatively concerned. She was saying things that were true and said in a way that was clearly said by someone who knew they were true, and that was harder to manage than denial. "Miss Bellamy," he said, and his tone had shifted slightly, "I want to be straightforward with you. I have no cause to remove you from this property. I have no legal basis for any action at this time. What I have is a request from a significant financial figure in this county to come out and assess the situation." "And have you assessed it?" He looked around the kitchen. At the clean order of it, at the ledger she had moved to the side, not hidden, just set aside. At her, sitting across from him with her hands folded and her back straight and not a single crack in her composure. "I'm assessing it now," he said. "Good," she said. "Then let me help you. This ranch is producing better numbers than it has in 3 years according to its own records. My sisters are here of their own choosing. Nathaniel Crowe is a man of sound mind and sound judgment who made a decision I have spent every day since trying to prove was not a mistake." She paused. "Is there anything else you need to assess?" Pruitt looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his hat. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't believe there is." He left without coffee and without ceremony, and Clara stayed at the kitchen table until she heard his horse leave the yard. Then she put her head in her hands for exactly 30 seconds, the only 30 seconds she would allow herself, and then she stood up, got the ledger pages from the flour tin, and went back to work. She did not tell her sisters about the visit, not yet. Dora would worry productively, which meant she would try to fix things she couldn't fix. May would worry quietly, which was worse. She sent Calhoun to Billings with a note for Nathaniel that evening. Short, plain, the way she knew he would want it. Sheriff came Wednesday. Sent by Grayson. No legal action. Come back soon. We need to move before he does. C. Calhoun came back Thursday morning with Nathaniel 2 hours behind him. Nathaniel arrived with a man she hadn't met, mid-40s, compact, wearing a good suit that had seen genuine use rather than just display. He carried a leather case and moved with the particular efficiency of someone who billed by the hour and did not waste his own time any more than his clients. "This is Arthur Hale," Nathaniel said, "the lawyer I mentioned. He's already read the summary I sent ahead." Hale looked at Clara. "Mr. Crowe tells me you have documentation," he said. No preamble. She liked him immediately. "I do," she said. "Come inside." She spread the ledger pages on the table and walked Hale through everything she had found, in order, with the cross-references she had built between the original note and Grayson's modified entries. She had organized it the way she organized everything, clearly, completely, without excess. Hale asked 7 questions, all of them precise. She answered everyone. When she was done, Hale sat back and looked at the papers and said nothing for a moment. "How long did this take you?" he said. 3 weeks, she said. "And you had no legal training?" "No. You've constructed a cleaner prima facie fraud case than most trained lawyers I know would have produced in the same time." He glanced at Nathaniel. "She's right about the interest modifications. If these documents are accurate, and they appear to be, Grayson altered the debt terms after the note was signed. That is actionable, potentially across multiple families if the pattern holds." "It holds," Clara said. "My father's ledger shows the pattern, but he was only one of Grayson's debtors. I've spoken to Calhoun, whose cousin lost a property 3 years ago under circumstances that sound identical. If someone examined those records, one case at a time," Hale said. "But he was writing fast. We need to file before he has any indication we're moving. If Grayson gets wind of this before we're in front of a judge, he will do 2 things. He will move the relevant documents, and he will file a preemptive complaint that muddles the legal waters." "How long do we have?" "Days," Hale said. "Not weeks." He looked at Clara. "I'll need certified copies of everything. And I'll need a sworn affidavit from you describing exactly how you discovered these discrepancies." "When?" "Tonight," he said. "If you're willing." "I've been willing for 3 weeks," she said. "Tell me what you need." They worked through the evening. Hale was methodical and thorough, and asked questions the way good lawyers asked questions, not fishing, but confirming. Building a structure that could hold weight. Clara answered everything, and noticed that Nathaniel stayed at the table through all of it, not participating, but present the particular presence of a man who wants you to know he is not leaving the room. By 10 o'clock, Hale had what he needed. "I'll ride back tonight," he said. "I want this filed first thing in the morning." He looked at both of them. "When this moves, it will move fast. Grayson will know within an hour of the filing. You need to be prepared for what comes after that." "What comes after that?" Dora asked. She had come downstairs an hour ago and sat quietly at the end of the table, listening. Hale looked at her. "He'll escalate," he said. "Everything he's been doing quietly, he'll do loudly. The reputational pressure, the social campaign, it will go from a low burn to something more visible." "Let it," Clara said. Everyone at the table looked at her. "Let him escalate," she said. "Loud is visible. Visible is something people can examine. What I can't fight is the quiet version, the letters, the whispers, the 100 small pressures that each look reasonable in isolation. If he goes loud, he shows people what he is. Hale studied her for a moment. You're not wrong, he said, but it will be unpleasant. I'm not new to unpleasant, she said. Hale left. Nathaniel walked him to his horse and came back inside and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at Clara with that expression she had stopped trying to categorize. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I'm not the one who spent 3 weeks building a legal case in secret while running a household and managing a ranch and dealing with a sheriff's visit. She looked at him. You know about the sheriff. Calhoun told me before your note arrived. He came the rest of the way into the kitchen. I should have been here. You were getting us a lawyer, she said. That was more useful. Clara. He said her name the way he'd said it in the barn with a weight in it that she felt but wouldn't let herself look at directly yet. You didn't have to do this alone. I know, she said. But I'm very good at alone. She said it without self-pity, as a plain statement of fact. He sat down across from her. I know you are, he said. That's not the same as it being what you deserve. The kitchen was very quiet. Nathaniel, she said carefully. I know, he said. Not yet, no. He stood back up. But I'm saying it anyway, so you have it. He went to bed. Clara sat at the table alone and held what he'd said and turned it over and felt the edges of it and could not find the place where it was something other than what it sounded like. She went to bed an hour later and slept better than she had in years, which frightened her slightly, because she was not accustomed to sleeping well, and she did not entirely trust it. The filing hit Harlan Creek like a stone, dropped into still water, the impact small at first, and then the rings moving outward. It was Friday morning when Hale filed. By Friday afternoon, Grayson knew. By Friday evening, half the town knew. By Saturday morning, the version of events that Clara had predicted arrived in full loud public and constructed with Grayson's particular skill for making offense look like defense. He called a community meeting. That was the move she hadn't predicted, not the move itself, but the speed of it. He sent word to every prominent family in the county, to the reverend, to the finance board, to 3 neighboring ranchers who held significant community standing. The meeting was set for Monday at the social hall. The stated purpose was to discuss concerns about financial impropriety in the county. The unstated purpose, which everyone understood, was to try the case of Clara Bellamy in public before it reached any judge. Calhoun brought her the news Saturday morning. He stood in the yard with his hat in his hands, the same posture as the sheriff. She noted, but entirely different in quality, and he told her everything he'd heard in town the previous evening. When he was done, she said, Will you be at the meeting? Yes, ma'am. Will Boone? Yes, ma'am. Tell me who else will be there that isn't Grayson's. He thought about it, named 6 families. She knew 2 of them had interacted with them in town, had read their faces during the supply runs, had assessed the quality of their attention to the situation. Good, she said. Thank you, Calhoun. He nodded. Turn to go. Miss Bellamy. Yes. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had started the month deciding one thing about her and had ended up somewhere entirely different. I told 6 people at the church last Sunday what I know about this ranch, he said. What I actually know. From being here, she looked at him. I wanted you to know that, he said, in case it helps. She nodded once. It helps, she said, thank you. He left. She went inside and found Nathaniel at the table with the meeting notice in his hand. Someone had delivered a copy to the ranch gate that morning. He's moving faster than I thought, Nathaniel said. He's scared, Clara said. The filing rattled him. She sat down. He wants to establish the community narrative before the legal one has a chance to form. If he can make enough people believe his version publicly, a local judge may hesitate to rule against it. So we go to the meeting, Nathaniel said. We go to the meeting, she said. And do what? She looked at him. Tell the truth, she said. Plainly, in front of everyone, with the documentation to support it, she paused. I've spent my whole life being decided about before I opened my mouth. I am going to open my mouth on Monday. Something moved across Nathaniel's face. She saw it, quick then controlled, but not before she caught it. "All right," he said. His voice was steady. "Then we go." Dora appeared in the doorway. She had been listening. Clara had known she was there for 2 minutes. "I'm going too," she said. Dora's voice was calm and absolutely certain. He approached May on the street. "He sent a sheriff to this house. He has been running a campaign against my sister for 3 weeks, and I am not sitting at home while she walks into a room full of his people alone." She looked at Nathaniel. "Tell her." Nathaniel looked at Clara. "She's right." "I know she's right," Clara said. "I just wanted to spare you the room." "I don't need sparing," Dora said. "I need to be useful." Clara looked at her sister, the pretty face and the sharp eyes and the fierce loyalty that had always been underneath the prettiness where most people never bothered to look, and she felt something hot and grateful move through her chest. "All right," she said, "we all go." May said from the back of the room where she had been so quiet they had both forgotten she was there, obviously. The Monday meeting was set for 7 in the evening, and by 6:30 the social hall was more full than Clara had ever seen it. She stood outside with Nathaniel and her sisters, and looked at the light coming through the windows and the shapes of people moving behind them, and she felt not fear, exactly. Something more alert than fear, the focused, forward-leaning feeling she had when she sat down with a difficult ledger and knew she was going to find what she was looking for. "Ready?" Nathaniel said beside her. "Yes," she said. "Clara." He stopped her with a hand on her arm the first time he had touched her deliberately, not in passing. She felt the weight of it, whatever happens in there. "You are not alone in that room." She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at his face. "I know," she said, and she meant it, which was new. They went in. The room went quiet the moment they walked through the door, not the organic quiet of people noticing something, but the deliberate quiet of a room that had been waiting, and now had what it was waiting for. Grayson was already at the front, standing near the speaking platform with 3 men Clara recognized as his closest financial associates. The Reverend sat in the front row. Sheriff Pruitt stood along the side wall. The finance board president sat in the second row, with the careful expression of a man who had not yet decided which way to face. Grayson looked at them as they came in. He looked at Clara specifically, and the look was pleasant and completely cold, the look of a man who has arranged the board the way he wants it and is waiting for the pieces to move. "Miss Bellamy," he said, "I'm glad you came. This concerns you, after all." "It does," she said. She moved to a seat in the third row. Her sister sat on either side of her. Nathaniel sat beside Dora. Grayson opened the meeting with the practiced ease of a man who had run public gatherings for 20 years. He spoke about community, about the sacred trust of financial relationships, about his years of service to the county's families. He was very good at it. He was smooth and warm and reasonable, and by the time he reached the substance of his complaint, he had built a frame around it that made everything sound like concern. He described the transfer. He described Nathaniel's intervention as impulsive and potentially coerced. He described Clara's arrival at the ranch that were explicit, but carried the implication of a woman who knew how to make herself useful to a lonely widower in ways that went beyond the professional. Clara sat through all of it without moving. She held her hands in her lap, and she listened to every word, and she filed every sentence, and she did not allow her face to show what she was doing, which was dismantling everything he said and building the response in real time. When Grayson finished and the room shifted with the weight of everything he had implied, the finance board president spoke first. He asked Nathaniel directly, was the arrangement what Grayson had described? Nathaniel stood. He was not a man who performed composure. He simply had it. "No," he said, "it is not." And then he described exactly what had happened in that train post, and he described it with the precision of a man who remembers things completely, because he was fully present when they happened. And the room listened because Nathaniel Crowe had 12 years of earned credibility in this county, and it did not evaporate because Walter Grayson had written letters. Then the Reverend spoke. He spoke carefully, in the language of community welfare. And what he said amounted to a question about propriety, about whether it was suitable for three women to be living under a single man's roof in a working arrangement, rather than a proper married one. Clara stood up. She didn't wait to be recognized. She didn't ask permission. She stood, and she said, "May I speak?" in a voice that assumed the answer was yes, and the room, surprised enough by her standing that it didn't know how to refuse her, went quiet. She looked at the Reverend. "You're asking about propriety," she said. "I want to talk about something else first. I want to talk about the debt." Grayson's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. "The debt that my family owed to Mr. Grayson," she said, "was not the debt my father signed. The original note carried an interest rate of 8% annually. The entries in Mr. Grayson's own ledger, the ledger I have been reviewing for 3 weeks, show that the rate was modified twice in the first year without our family's knowledge or consent. By the time the note was called in, the effective rate had been running at 14% for 2 years. She looked at the room. "I have documentation, dated, cross-referenced, reviewed by a lawyer who filed suit in the county court on Friday morning." The room did not go quiet. It erupted. Not loudly, more like a field of dry grass when a spark hits it, the sound of something catching in multiple places at once, the rustle and murmur of people turning to each other and doing rapid arithmetic. Grayson said, "Miss Bellamy, these are very serious allegations." "They are," she said. "I made them seriously." She looked at him directly. "Mr. Grayson, how many families in this county currently hold notes with your office?" "That is not. How many of those families have lost properties to you in the last 10 years?" "Miss Bellamy, this is not the appropriate forum." "You called this forum," she said. "You sent the invitations. You arranged the room." She looked at the finance board president. "I would like to request that the board examine the note records for the families who lost properties to Mr. Grayson in the past decade. Specifically, I would like them to compare the original note terms to the ledger entries in Mr. Grayson's office." She paused. "I believe they will find that my family was not the only one." The finance board president was looking at Grayson. The quality of his look had changed entirely in the last 60 seconds. Grayson's face was controlled. His voice was controlled. But Clara had been watching controlled people her whole life, and she saw the thing underneath: the rapid recalculation, the assessment of exposure, the first edges of something that looked like actual fear. "These claims," he said, "are the product of a woman who arrived in this county with a failing property and a desperate situation, and has constructed a legal theory to deflect from the impropriety of her own." "Mr. Grayson." It was Calhoun's voice from the back of the room, and it landed like a flat stone dropped on a hard floor. "I've worked Nathaniel Crowe's ranch twice a week for 6 years. I've been working it since these women arrived. I want to tell this room what I've actually seen, as opposed to what you've implied." He stood. He was a plain man, Calhoun, not given to speeches. But he spoke clearly, and he spoke truthfully, and he spoke about the specific observable things he had seen Tina Crowe ranch over the past weeks, and everything he described was the antithesis of what Grayson had implied. When he sat down, Boone stood up, said 4 sentences. Sat down. Then a woman in the 4th row, Mrs. Alderton, the judge's wife, who had not said a word to Clara in all her years of supply runs, stood up and said that she had known Nathaniel Crowe for 11 years, and if he said the arrangement was proper, she believed him. And furthermore, she thought the community would do well to examine who in this room had the most to gain from keeping everyone's attention on Miss Bellamy's living arrangements and away from their own financial records. The room went very still. Grayson looked at Mrs. Alderton. Mrs. Alderton looked back at him with the particular serenity of a woman who has nothing to lose and knows it. It was the finance board president who finally said quietly, "Walter, I think we're going to need to examine those records." And in that sentence, in that single even sentence from a man who had been Grayson's ally for 15 years, Clara felt the whole architecture of what Grayson had built begin to shift. Not collapse, not yet. It would take the legal process for that. But shift. the way a foundation shifts before a wall goes. Grayson looked at the room. He looked at Clara. His expression was entirely composed and entirely revealing at once the face of a man who has just watched the most important piece on the board move to the wrong side and is deciding how to proceed with the pieces that remain. "This meeting," he said, "is adjourned." He walked out. The room stayed exactly where it was. Clara sat down. She sat down because her legs had decided they needed to. Not because she was done. She would never be done in the way that let you stop entirely, but because she had been carrying the weight of this particular hour for 3 weeks, and it needed somewhere to go. Nathaniel sat down beside her, not across from her. Beside her, close enough that she felt the warmth of his arm against hers. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. Dora reached across and took her hand, and May put her head on her shoulder, and the four of them sat in that room while the community reorganized itself around them, and for the first time in as long as Clara could remember. The reorganization was moving toward her instead of away. Then the finance board president came and crouched down in front of her, a significant man bending his knees to address a woman at eye level, and he said quietly, "Miss Bellamy, I would like to see that documentation, all of it. At your earliest convenience. I can have it to you tomorrow morning," she said. "Good," he said. He looked at Nathaniel. Then back at her. "I want you to know," he said, "that I have been sitting on that board for 14 years, and I have had questions about certain of my records for at least 5 of them." He paused. "I did not ask them. I should have." He looked at the ledger she had brought, the annotated copy, the one she had carried into the room in plain sight. "Thank you for asking them for me," he left. Clara looked at the ledger in her hands. She thought about her father's face when he signed that original note. The relief on it, the belief that someone was helping. She thought about the 14 years of compounding interest. The fence that didn't get repaired, the cattle that didn't get bought. The 3 daughters who grew up in the specific texture of a household that could never quite get ahead and never understood why. She thought about the woman sitting outside a trading post 3 weeks ago, deciding to keep going on the strength of a man she had never met, offering something she didn't yet know how to trust. "Clara," Nathaniel's voice. Right beside her she turned. He was looking at her with an expression that had given up pretending to be anything other than what it was. "You did that," he said. "Not me. Not Hale. You built that case in 3 weeks out of a ledger that most people wouldn't have looked at twice, and you walked into a room full of people who had already decided about you, and you changed their minds." She looked at him. "We're not done," she said. "No," he said. "We're not done." He paused. "But I want you to know what I just watched. Because I don't think you're going to let yourself know it on your own." She held that. She held it the way she held things she wasn't ready to fully open, carefully, at a slight distance, just long enough to confirm that it was real. "Nathaniel," he said, "not yet." "I know." But he reached over and covered her hands with his, just for a moment, and she let him. And outside the social hall the Montana night was clear and enormous, and Walter Grayson's carriage was already moving fast down the road toward the north end of town, carrying a man who had just made the mistake of going loud. And in the county courthouse, Arthur Hale's filing sat in the clerk's drawer, waiting for morning. Grayson did not go quietly. Clara had known he wouldn't. Men like Grayson, never did they had too much invested in the appearance of righteousness to simply step aside when the floor shifted under them. What they did instead was find a new angle, and they did it fast, and they did it before the dust from the last move had settled. By Tuesday morning, less than 12 hours after the social hall word had reached the ranch that Grayson had filed his own complaint with the county court. Not a response to Hale's fraud claim, something separate. He was alleging that the transfer Nathaniel had executed to clear the Bellamy debt had been made under duress, that Nathaniel had been emotionally compromised by grief, manipulated by women in a desperate situation, and that the transfer should be voided on those grounds. Calhoun brought the news. He stood in the yard with his jaw tight and said it plain, and Clara listened to every word and felt the specific cold clarity that arrived in her when something important required immediate thought rather than immediate feeling. "He's trying to unwind the transfer," she said. "That's what it sounds like," Calhoun said. "If he voids the transfer, the debt comes back." "Yes, ma'am." "And if the debt comes back, you lose the ranch." Nathaniel said it from the doorway. He had come out behind her. His voice was level, but she heard what was underneath it. "And Hale's fraud case loses its central witness, because you'd be back in a position where you owe Grayson money and anything you say about his records looks like self-interest." Clara looked at him. "He's not wrong," she said. "It's a good move." "It's not going to work," Nathaniel said. "It might," she said. "If he gets a sympathetic judge and enough character witnesses who are willing to testify that you were not of sound mind when you made the decision." She looked at the road. "How many people in this county does he have that kind of leverage over?" The silence lasted long enough to answer the question. "We need Hale," she said. Today Nathaniel was already reaching for his coat. Hale arrived by mid-afternoon. He read the copy of Grayson's filing that Calhoun had obtained from the clerk's office, obtained being a word that covered a range of methods, none of which Hale asked about, and he read it twice. And then he set it down on the kitchen table and looked at Clara. "He's not wrong that this is a viable strategy," Hale said. "In front of the wrong judge, emotional incapacity claims have succeeded on less." "Which judge?" Nathaniel said. "Harmon," Hale said. "If it goes to Harmon, we're in trouble. Harmon has ruled in Grayson's favor 3 times in the last 5 years. 2 of those times the decisions didn't survive appeal, but the damage was already done." "Can we prevent it going to Harmon?" Clara said. "We can request assignment, but we can't guarantee it." Hale looked at his notes. "What we can do is move first. If we get a hearing date on the fraud claim before the duress claim is scheduled, establish the legal narrative before he does." He looked at Nathaniel. "That means I need your full account. Written, sworn, witnessed. Your mental state at the time of the transfer, your financial understanding of it. Your reasons." "When?" Nathaniel said. Now Hale said, "Tonight. I'll take it back with me in the morning and file first thing." Nathaniel sat down at the table. He looked at Hale. Then he looked at Clara, that full, quiet look, and something passed across his face that she had not seen there before. Not hesitation. Something more like decision. The look of a man who has been moving towards something and has arrived. "All right," he said. "Let's do it." Clara made coffee. She moved around the kitchen while Hale put Nathaniel through his account, and she listened to every word, and what she heard was the clearest, most precise description of a sound decision she had ever heard a person give. Nathaniel described the trading post without drama, without embellishment. He described what he saw the room, the arrangement Grayson had proposed, Clara's refusal, the specific calculation he had made. He described the terms he had offered and why he had offered them and what he had understood them to mean. And then Hale asked, "At the time of the transfer, were you in a state of grief that impaired your judgment?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I lost my wife 4 years ago," he said. "I grieved. I still do in the way that doesn't entirely stop. But grief and impairment are not the same thing. I run a ranch. I make financial decisions every season. I managed my accounts through the hardest years of my life, and not one of them went sideways." He paused. "The decision I made in that trading post was the clearest I'd made in years. Not in spite of what I'd lost. Because of it. Because I understood what it meant to lose something you should have protected." Hale wrote. Clara kept her back to the room and stood at the stove and breathed carefully. "And your feelings toward Miss Bellamy at the time?" Hale asked. "Were they personal in nature, in a way that might have clouded your assessment?" "No," Nathaniel said. "I had never met the woman." "And now," Hale said. The question was quiet and professional and entirely necessary. A pause, longer than the others. "Now is different," Nathaniel said. "But now had nothing to do with then." Clara poured the coffee. Her hands were steady. She was very focused on making sure her hands were steady. Hale finished before 10 o'clock. He gathered his papers and his coat and said he would have the filing ready by first light. At the door he stopped and looked at Clara. "Miss Bellamy," he said. "I want to say something that is not legal counsel." "It's personal." "All right," she said. "I have practiced law in this territory for 18 years, he said. "I have seen a great number of people in hard situations. Most of them react to hard situations in one of two ways: they collapse or they run." He looked at her. "You did neither. You sat down and you built something." He paused. "Whatever the court decides, that is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot." He left. The kitchen held its quiet. Dora and May had come downstairs sometime during the last hour and were sitting at the table's far end. Dora was watching Clara. May was watching her hands. Nathaniel had not moved from his chair. "Clara," Dora said. Her voice was careful. "What happens if the judge rules against us?" Clara sat down. She looked at her sister straight. "Then we deal with that," she said. "But we haven't lost yet." "And I don't intend to. And if we have to leave," May said. Quiet. Direct. The question with the most weight in it. Clara looked at her youngest sister. She thought about the garden May had built. The boot that had been mended without a word. The first laugh she'd heard from her in months. "We're not going to have to leave," she said. "But if we did, we would be leaving as people who told the truth in front of everyone, with documentation to prove it, having done everything that could be done." She paused. "That's not nothing either." May nodded. She looked at Nathaniel. "Thank you for the boot." Nathaniel blinked. "A thing so small it was almost nothing. It needed fixing," he said. "A lot of things need fixing," May said. "Most people walk past them." The room held that for a moment. Then Dora stood and said she was going to bed, and May followed, and the kitchen narrowed to the two people left in it. Nathaniel looked at Clara across the table. I meant what I said to Hale," he said. "I know," she said. "About now being different." "I know," she said again. "I want to say it properly," he said, "not sideways. Not around the edges." He leaned forward. His hands were flat on the table, the same work-round hands she had looked at the first evening, and she was looking at them again now. "I know the timing is wrong. I know there's a court filing and a man with a grudge and a dozen other things that have to be dealt with before anything else. I'm not asking you to deal with this tonight." She looked at him. "But I want you to know," he said, "that what I feel for you is not gratitude. It is not admiration, though I have that. It is not respect, though I have that, too." He paused. "It is something that started in a trading post when I saw a woman who had been told her whole life that she wasn't worth choosing, standing straight in a room full of people who were deciding her life without her permission." His voice was very level. "And it has been growing every single day since." Clara sat across from him and held the full weight of what he had said and did not look away from it. She was a woman who had spent 27 years being looked past, being assessed and dismissed, being the one who managed and provided and endured while the world decided that the prettiness of other women was more valuable than everything she actually was. She had built armor out of that. Good armor. Functional armor that had gotten her through things that would have flattened someone who went into them unprotected. But armor was only useful when there was something to protect against. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I know how to run a household and manage accounts and fight men like Grayson. I don't know how." She stopped. "I've never been chosen before. Not like this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it." "Nothing," he said. "You don't have to do anything with it. I'm not telling you so you'll do something. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that someone sees you. Completely. Not the version of you that's useful or competent or strong." He paused. "All of you." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "When this is over, when Grayson is dealt with and the court is done, and we're not fighting on 3 fronts at once, I would like to have a conversation." "A conversation," he said. "About this." About, she made a small gesture that somehow covered everything she meant. About what this is, something shifted in his face. Quiet? He said. I'd like that. Good, she said. Get some sleep, Nathaniel. We have a fight tomorrow. He almost smiled. It was close enough to count. The fight came, but not from the direction she expected. Wednesday morning, two things happened before 8 o'clock. The first was that Hale's request for a hearing date on the fraud claim was granted. The clerk assigned it to Judge Alderton, Mrs. Alderton's husband, the man whose wife had stood up in the social hall and said she believed Nathaniel Crowe. Clara did not believe in luck as a general principle, but she allowed herself 10 seconds of something adjacent to it. The second thing was the letter. It arrived with the morning's post, addressed to Clara in a handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it at the kitchen table while Nathaniel was still outside. It was 3 paragraphs unsigned, and what it said made her sit very still for a full minute before she moved again. The letter was from a woman. She didn't give her name. She said she had been at the social hall Monday evening. She said that what Clara had said about the debt records had kept her awake for 2 nights, because 12 years ago her family had lost their property to Walter Grayson, under circumstances that had never fully made sense to her. Her husband had accepted it, had believed the number Grayson gave him was the number he owed. But she had kept the original note. She had kept it because her husband said it didn't matter anymore, and she had never been able to make herself throw it away. She wanted to know if someone would look at it. Clara read the letter twice. Then she stood up, put on her coat, and went out to find Nathaniel. He was at the fence line. He turned when he heard her coming and read her face before she said a word. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the letter. He read it, his jaw tightened. "There are more of them," he said. It wasn't a question. "This is the first one willing to say so in writing," she said. "But yes." She looked at the horizon. "Grayson has been doing this for years. We were just the first ones with documentation he couldn't suppress before it reached a lawyer. If she brings that original note, it corroborates everything. Multiple victims means a pattern. A pattern means this isn't a dispute between Grayson and one family, it's a systemic fraud operation." She looked at him. "It also means the duress claim against you becomes considerably harder to sustain. A judge looking at a pattern of predatory lending doesn't have much patience for the predator's claim that the man who exposed him wasn't thinking straight." Nathaniel looked at the letter. "Who is she?" She didn't say. "Can you find out?" "I have an idea," Clara said. She went to see Mrs. Alderton that afternoon, alone by wagon with the unsigned letter in her coat pocket. Mrs. Alderton received her in the front room with the same unruffled composure she had brought to the social hall, poured tea without being asked, and sat down across from her. "You got a letter," Mrs. Alderton said. "Not a question." Clara looked at her. "You know who sent it. I know several women in this county who have been waiting for someone to ask the right questions, Mrs. Alderton said. She picked up her tea. "The right question, as it turns out, was the one you asked Monday evening." In front of everyone, she paused. It took some courage to ask it in that room. "I've had practice," Clara said. "I know," Mrs. Alderton said. "I've been watching you in that supply store for 3 years. She met Clara's eyes. "I should have said something sooner. I want you to know I understand that." Clara looked at her. She thought about 3 years of supply runs. 3 years of being looked through in that store, while the shopkeeper's wife served her with brisk efficiency and no warmth. She thought about all the rooms she had been in, where someone with influence had looked past her and chosen not to speak. "How many women?" she said. "4 that I know of personally, Mrs. Alderton said. "Possibly more who don't yet know to connect what happened to their families to Walter Grayson's methods." "I need them to speak to Hale," Clara said. "I need their original notes if they have them. I need them to be willing to be witnesses if it comes to that." "I know what you need," Mrs. Alderton said. "I've already spoken to 3 of them." She set down her cup. 2 will come forward. The third, she paused. The third has a son who currently holds credit with Grayson's office. She's afraid. That's enough of a reason, Clara said. Yes, Mrs. Alderton agreed, it is. She stood, which was the gesture of a woman who had made a decision before the conversation started, and was now moving to execute it. I'll have them at Arthur Hale's office Friday morning. Will that work? Yes, she said. That works. At the door, Mrs. Alderton stopped her. Miss Bellamy, she said. She said it with a quality that was different from every other time anyone had said her name in this county, something direct in it, something that looked straight at her and did not slide past. I want to say something, Clarissa said. I watched what Walter Grayson did in his trading post 3 weeks ago, she said. I was not there, but I know what he did because I have known him for 20 years, and I know exactly the kind of thing he does. She paused. And I watched what you did in response to it, not just Monday evening. Every day since. The way you came into that supply store and held your head up when half this town had already decided. The way you worked that ranch and built that case and walked into that hall. She looked at Clara with full, undeflected attention. This town does not deserve you, Miss Bellamy. I hope someday you'll decide to stay anyway. Clara stood in the doorway and felt the words land, felt them land in the specific place that had been braced and protected and armored for so long that she had nearly forgotten what it felt like to have something reach it. Thank you, she said. Her voice was entirely steady. She was very focused on keeping it that way. She drove back to the ranch in the long afternoon light, and she thought about everything that had happened in 3 weeks and 4 days. And she thought about what it meant that 2 women she had never met were willing to walk into a courthouse and tell the truth. And she thought about a man sitting at a kitchen table saying, I want to say it properly, with his hands flat on the wood and nothing hidden in his face. She thought about her father's ledger, the 14 years of compounding interest. The fence that didn't get repaired. She thought about the morning 3 weeks ago when she had looked in the cracked mirror and said it is going to be fine and had not quite believed it. The hearing was set for Thursday of the following week. In the 7 days between, the county reorganized itself in ways that Clara watched and cataloged and did not allow herself to fully trust until they were confirmed by action. The Finance Board announced a review of Grayson's loan records quietly, officially, in the language of institutional process that meant they had already seen enough to be alarmed. 3 businesses on the main street of Harlan Creek extended credit to the Crowe Ranch account that had been quietly restricted for 2 weeks. Pruitt's shopkeeper, without explanation or apology, began talking to Clara again when she came in for supplies. Small things, each one individually deniable as coincidence. Collectively, the unmistakable texture of a community recalibrating. Grayson was visible in town but not operational in the way he had been. He moved through his usual spaces with the same composed surface, but the spaces themselves had changed around him. The conversations that used to happen near him were now happening a step further away, the automatic deference slightly delayed. The room temperature of any gathering he entered slightly cooler. He knew what was coming. Clara could see it in the way he watched her when she passed him on the street Thursday morning, not with the calculating patience of a man who still believes he controls the situation, but with the tight, controlled expression of a man containing what the situation has become. She looked at him directly when she passed. She held it for exactly 1 second. Then she walked on. The day before the hearing, Hale came to the ranch with the organized testimony of the 2 women who had agreed to come forward. He walked Clara and Nathaniel through what to expect in the courtroom. He told them that Grayson's lawyer, a man named Cole, who had ridden in from the capital specifically for this, was competent and would be looking for any emotional inconsistency he could use. What does that mean for me specifically? Clara said. It means he'll try to make you angry, Hale said. Or he'll try to make you cry. Either one gives him something to work with. A woman who's angry looks vindictive. A woman who cries looks unstable. And a woman who does neither, Clara said, looks like the most credible witness in the room, Hale said. She nodded. All right, He looked at her for a moment. "Miss Bellamy, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." "Not for the case. For me to understand, ask it." "In that trading post 3 weeks ago," I said, "when Nathaniel Crowe offered you the arrangement, did any part of you believe it was genuine? Or did you accept it because it was the best of two bad options?" Clara considered the question. She considered it seriously, the way she considered everything. "I accepted it because it was the best available option," she said. "And because I could not find the thing that was wrong with it, which either meant he was an extraordinarily sophisticated deceiver or that there wasn't one." She paused. "I believed at about 60% confidence that it was genuine." And now? She thought about the barn, the kitchen table, the boot that was mended without a word, a man saying, "I want to say it properly," in a voice that did not perform anything. "Now my confidence is different," she said. Hale looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile and was something more than professional. "Good," he said. "Hold on to that. Juries read certainty, and the most certain thing you have is something you actually feel." He left. Nathaniel found her in the garden after May's garden now, really, but Clara often went there when she needed to think. She was kneeling in the dirt with no particular purpose, just her hands in the soil and the evening light long across the valley. He sat down on the garden's low fence rail. He didn't say anything immediately. He let the quiet exist for a minute, which was something she had come to understand was deliberate in him, the way he gave things room. "Are you afraid?" he said, finally. She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I've been afraid before, and this doesn't feel like it." This feels, she looked for the word. "Decided," she said. "Like I've made all the decisions there are to make, and now I just have to see what the world does with them." "That's what courage feels like," he said. "From the outside, at least." She looked up at him. "What does it look like from the outside?" "Like a woman who never once let any of this touch the part of her that matters most," he said. "Like someone who knows exactly who she is and decided that was worth defending." He paused. "I've been watching you for 4 weeks. I know who you are, Clara Bellamy. And I want you to know that what I see it isn't what you do. It isn't how well you run accounts or build legal cases or manage a room full of hostile people." She waited. "It's who you are when none of that is required," he said. "In the garden with May, at the kitchen table at midnight. When you think no one's watching." His voice was very quiet. "That's who I see, and that's who I stopped. That's who I want beside me." Clara knelt in May's garden with the evening light on her face and the Montana sky enormous above everything, and she felt the armor, the good, functional. 27 years of earning armor settled down into something that was still there but was no longer braced. She looked at Nathaniel Crowe sitting on the fence rail in the evening light, plain and honest and completely without performance. And she thought about a cracked mirror, and it is going to be fine, and 100 mornings of making something out of nothing, because there was no alternative. And she thought that maybe not certainly, not without evidence, but maybe fine had been an underestimate. "Ask me again," she said, "when it's done." His face did something quiet, and "Sure I will," he said. "I promise." Tomorrow the courtroom was waiting. Grayson's lawyer was waiting. The whole weight of a legal case built on 3 weeks of midnight work was waiting. And somewhere in a county courthouse, Arthur Hale was laying out documents in careful order, building a structure that had been built by a woman who had never been taught that she was worth building things for, and had built them anyway. The morning of the hearing, Clara was up before dawn. Not because she couldn't sleep she had slept, which still surprised her, but because there was a particular quality to that darkness, before first light, that she had always found useful for thinking. The kind of quiet that asked nothing of you and gave you room to be exactly as uncertain as you actually were before the day required you to be otherwise. She dressed in the kitchen by lamplight. Her best dress, which was not remarkable, but was clean and pressed and fit her properly, which she had decided long ago was the only standard worth holding to. She put her hair up. She looked at her own hands on the table, the work roughened, capable hands that had documented 3 weeks of fraud, that had signed papers in Grayson's trading post with Nathaniel standing beside her, that had knelt in garden dirt and held her sisters and turned ledger pages by lamplight until her eyes ached. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she heard boots on the floor above her, and Nathaniel came downstairs. He stopped when he saw her. He was already dressed, his good coat, clean shirt, the particular care of a man who understood the significance of presentation without being vain about it. They looked at each other across the kitchen in the lamplight. "You slept," he said. "I did," she said. "You?" "Some." He went to the stove and put the kettle on without being asked. An entirely domestic gesture, entirely natural, and she noticed it the way she noticed everything, filed it, held it, understood what it meant about how much had shifted in 4 weeks. "Hale sent word last night after you were in bed," the 2 witnesses confirmed. "They'll be there." "Good," she said. "Cole Grayson's lawyer, he filed a motion yesterday evening to delay the hearing." Judge Alderton denied it. Clara looked at him. "How do you know all this?" "Calhoun has a cousin who clerks for the court," he said. He almost smiled. "Information moves faster than wagons in this county if you know who to ask." She almost smiled back. What was the basis of the delay motion? Insufficient time to prepare a response to the fraud documentation. He poured the water when the kettle was ready. Handed her the cup. "Which tells us something. That they haven't found a way to explain the discrepancies," she said. "That they haven't found a way to explain them that holds water," he said. "There's a difference. Cole is good. He'll have something. I just don't know what it is yet." That was the thing she had been turning over in her mind since before dawn. She knew what Hale had. She knew the documentation was solid. What she didn't know was what Grayson had said to Cole in private, what version of events he had given his own lawyer, what he had admitted, what he had withheld, what angle of attack Cole had constructed out of the pieces available to him. The unknown was always the dangerous part. Dora came downstairs at 6. May at 6:15. They ate breakfast together, the 4 of them, the way they had been eating together for 4 weeks, with the particular ease of people who have found the rhythm of sharing a table. It was a quiet meal, but not an anxious one. Clara watched her sisters eat and thought about the morning they had driven into Harlan Creek in their best dresses with nowhere left to go, and felt the distance between that morning and this one like a physical thing. "Whatever happens today," Dora said, setting down her fork, "I want to say something." Everyone looked at her. "I want to say that I know what you did, Clara," she said. "Not just the ledger and the lawyer and the case. All of it. Every decision you made when there was no good option, for 3 years, for all of us." Her voice was steady. "I see it. I have always seen it. And I should have said so before now." The kitchen was very quiet. May said, "I see it too." Clara looked at her sisters. She held it the full weight of being seen by the people who mattered most, which was a different thing entirely from being seen by a room full of strangers, and then she said, "Let's go win a court case." Because if she said anything else she was going to cry, and she had decided that was not on the agenda for today. The Harlan Creek Courthouse was a 2-story building that smelled of old wood and paper, and the particular institutional seriousness of a place where consequences were decided. Clara had been inside it once before, years ago, on an errand for her father. She had been 17, and she had sat in the hallway and waited and not been permitted to be present for the proceeding. She was not sitting in any hallway today. Hale met them outside. He was composed in the way of a man who had been in courtrooms for 18 years and had learned to keep his nerves somewhere, say, below the surface, where they were useful rather than visible. "It's a full room," he said. "News traveled?" "Of course it did," Clara said. "Cole has 3 witnesses. I don't know who they are yet." "Grayson's people," Nathaniel said, "almost certainly. But witnesses to what specifically I don't know until we're in there." Hale looked at Clara. "Whatever he brings, you stay exactly where you are. Level, clear, factual. You have the documentation. Nothing he says can change what those ledger pages say." "I know," she said. "And if he makes it personal, He will make it personal, she said. That's the only move he has left. The facts aren't on his side, so he'll try to make it about who I am rather than what I found. She looked at Hale steadily. I have been managing other people's opinions of who I am my entire life, Mr. Hale. I am prepared. Hale looked at her. Something in his expression settled. All right, he said. Let's go in. The room was full. Clara felt it the moment she crossed the threshold, the weight of that many people's attention. The specific pressure of a community that had gathered to witness something it understood was significant. She recognized faces, Mrs. Alderton in the second row, Calhoun and Boone along the left wall, the finance board president in the center section, the reverend in the back, whose presence she noted without reacting to. Grayson, on the right side of the room with Cole beside him, a tall, precise man in a city suit who was already arranging papers with the confident efficiency of someone who believed in what he was about to do. Clara walked to her seat beside Hale and she did not look at Grayson. Not because she was afraid to, because she had decided he was not worth the expenditure of her attention until she was required to spend it on him. Judge Alderton entered. The room stood, then sat. He was a compact man with a gray beard and the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who had been making difficult decisions long enough to know that rushing them did not improve them. He looked at the room once, took its measure, and opened the session. Hale went first. He presented the fraud case the way he had built it methodically, with the documentation laid out in sequence, the cross-references made explicit, the pattern made impossible to overlook. He introduced the ledger evidence. He introduced Clara's affidavit. He introduced the sworn testimony of the two women who had come forward, read into the record by Hale with their names attached and their original notes submitted as exhibits. The room was very quiet through all of it. Grayson's face was controlled. Cole's face was professionally blank. When Hale finished, Cole rose. He was good. Clara had expected him to be good, and he was precise, fluent, with the particular courtroom gift of making complicated things sound simple and simple things sound complicated depending on what the moment required. He attacked the documentation first. He questioned the chain of custody who had access to the ledger, how the original note had been preserved, whether the cross-references Clara had constructed were interpretations rather than facts. He was careful to say interpretations with a very specific tone, the tone that implied a woman sitting at a kitchen table doing arithmetic in the middle of the night was not the same as a trained financial expert conducting a formal audit. Then he called his first witness. It was the finance board's own clerk, a young man named Peterson, who had clearly been well briefed. He testified that Grayson's records had been reviewed in the ordinary course of business and had never raised concerns. He said the interest modifications Clara had identified were within the legal discretion of the lender under the terms of the original note. Hale cross-examined him for 6 minutes. By the end, Peterson had acknowledged that he had not personally reviewed the specific entries Clara had flagged, that his review had been general rather than specific, and that he could not confirm whether the modifications fell within the lender's discretion without examining the original note language against the specific entries. Cole's second witness was a property assessor who testified to the legitimate value of the debt, trying to establish that even if the interest had been modified, the total amount called in was not disproportionate to the asset. Hale let him finish, then spent 3 minutes establishing that proportionality was not the issue. Fraud was the issue. Whether the number was fair was irrelevant if the means of arriving at it violated the terms of the contract. Then Cole called his third witness, and the room shifted. The woman who walked to the stand was someone Clara had never seen before. Mid-50s, well-dressed, with a composed face and the bearing of someone who had prepared carefully for what she was about to do. Cole introduced her as Mrs. Frances Hollis, a resident of the county for 22 years. Mrs. Hollis, Cole said, did you have occasion to observe Miss Clara Bellamy in the weeks preceding the events that bring us here today? I did, Mrs. Hollis said. Several occasions. And what did you observe? I observed a woman who was very deliberate, she said, in her interactions with Mr. Crowe. She was calculating is the word I would use. The way she positioned herself in situations where he would feel responsible for her. The way she managed his sympathy. The room stirred. Hale was already on his feet. Objection. Speculation about the witness's interpretation. Sustained, Judge Alderton said. Mrs. Hollis, please limit your testimony to what you directly observed. Cole adjusted smoothly. What specific interactions did you directly observe? I saw her in Grayson's trading post, she said, when the arrangement was proposed. She was very composed, unusually so for a woman in that situation. I thought at the time, what you thought is not testimony, Alderton said. What did you see? Mrs. Hollis's composure tightened slightly. I saw her accept the arrangement very quickly. How quickly? Within a few minutes of Mr. Crowe's offer. Cole looked satisfied. Thank you. He turned to Hale, your witness. Hale stood. He walked to the stand with the unhurried certainty of a man who had seen this move before and had been prepared for it. Mrs. Hollis, he said, you testified that Miss Bellamy accepted the arrangement quickly. In your observation, what had preceded that acceptance? Mr. Crowe's offer before the offer. What had she been doing? A pause. She had been speaking with Mr. Grayson. Specifically, she had refused his proposal. She had refused a proposal that she described in your hearing as treating her and her sisters as a debt to be settled. Yes, and then a man she had never met offered her a genuine alternative with fair terms. And she accepted it. Hale looked at the witness, Mrs. Hollis. How long would you have needed to accept a legitimate alternative to a situation you had just described as unacceptable? The witness had no answer that would help her. No further questions, Hale said. Cole was already preparing his redirect when Judge Alderton held up one hand. I think, he said, that before we proceed further, I'd like to hear from Miss Bellamy directly. Cole was on his feet. Your Honor, the plaintiff has already submitted a sworn affidavit. I'm aware of what's been submitted, Alderton said. He looked at Clara. Miss Bellamy, please come forward. Clara stood. She walked to the front of the room and she was aware acutely, precisely aware of every person watching her. The room that had assembled to witness this. The people who had already decided. The people who hadn't decided yet. Grayson, sitting with his hands folded on the table, watching her with the controlled expression of a man waiting to see if the move he had made with Mrs. Hollis had done what he needed it to do. She stood in front of Judge Alderton, and she put her hands at her sides and she breathed. Miss Bellamy, Alderton said, I'm going to ask you some questions and I want plain answers. No legal language. Just the truth as you experienced it. Yes, sir, she said, on the day in question in Mr. Grayson's trading post, were you afraid? She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. Of what specifically? Of what he was asking us to agree to. And of what would happen to my sisters if we didn't. And when Mr. Crowe made his offer, what did you think? I thought it was either the best thing that had happened to my family in 3 years, she said, or a different kind of trap. And I couldn't tell which. A murmur in the room. Alderton did not respond to it. So why did you accept it, he said. Because the alternative was worse, she said. And because I couldn't find the thing that was wrong with his offer. I looked for it. I'm good at finding what's wrong with things. I didn't find it, and since then, Alderton said. Has it been what you feared, a different kind of trap? No, she said. It has been exactly what he said it was. And the documentation you've presented regarding Mr. Grayson's ledger, how did you come to examine that ledger? Mr. Crowe gave me full access to the ranch's accounts from the first week, she said. The Bellamy debt transfer was part of those records. I reviewed it the same way I review everything completely. And the discrepancies you found were not subtle once you knew to look for them, she said. The original note is clear. The ledger entries deviate from it at 2 specific points. I don't have legal training, but I have managed financial accounts for 3 years under difficult circumstances, and I know what a number that changes without authorization looks like." Alderton looked at her for a long moment. Then Cole rose. "Your Honor, if I may, I have one question for Miss Bellamy." Alderton nodded. Cole approached. He was unhurried, professional, and Clara watched him come and prepared herself for the specific angle she had been expecting, since Hale told her Cole would try to make it personal. "Miss Bellamy," Cole said, "you've described yourself as someone who looks for what's wrong with things. Someone who reviews accounts completely. Someone who is, by your own description, very careful and deliberate." He paused. "Would you say those qualities served you well in this situation?" "Yes," she said. "And would you say those same qualities might lead a person to construct a case, to look at a set of numbers and find the interpretation that serves them best, rather than the most accurate interpretation?" The room was very still. Clara looked at him. She held his gaze for exactly long enough. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I brought the original note and the ledger entries, and I showed the discrepancies to a lawyer, to a judge, and to this room. I have not asked anyone to take my interpretation. I have asked them to read what is written." She paused. "If Mr. Grayson's records are accurate, that should be easy to demonstrate. He has the original documents. He has 18 years of records. He has an entire office of papers." She looked at Grayson for the first time since she had entered the room directly, without flinching. "All any of us need him to do is show us a note that matches his ledger. That is a simple thing, for an honest man." The silence in the room was the loudest thing Clara had ever heard. Grayson's face did not change, but his hands, which had been folded on the table, moved. One small involuntary adjustment. Clara saw it. She believed Alderton saw it. She believed half the room saw it. Cole said no further questions and sat down. Alderton looked at the room. He looked at the documents in front of him. He looked at Clara, still standing. "You may be seated, Miss Bellamy," he said. She sat. Alderton took 20 minutes. He reviewed the submitted documents at the bench, with the focused attention of a man who was not performing deliberation but actually doing it. The room held its breath in the particular collective way that rooms do when something real is being decided. Grayson's table was very quiet. Hale's hand was flat on the table beside Clara, not touching her, but present. Then Alderton looked up. "I have reviewed the documentation submitted by the plaintiff," he said, "including the original note, the ledger entries, the affidavit of Miss Bellamy, and the sworn statements of the 2 additional witnesses. The discrepancies identified by Miss Bellamy are present, verifiable, and consistent across multiple entries. They represent modifications to the terms of a signed note that were made without the signatory's knowledge or consent." He paused. "That is fraud. It is not ambiguous, and it is not a matter of interpretation." Cole rose. "Your Honor, Mr. Cole, your client has the opportunity to produce documentation to demonstrate that these modifications were authorized under the original note terms. I have not seen that documentation in anything submitted to this court." Alderton looked at Grayson. "Mr. Grayson, do you have such documentation?" The room waited. Grayson looked at Cole. Cole looked at his papers. A very brief exchange, almost invisible. Clara caught it. "Your Honor," Cole said carefully, "my client would need time to retrieve." "Mr. Cole," Alderton said, "your client has had 3 weeks since the initial filing and a week since the detailed documentation was submitted. If such documentation existed and could be retrieved, I believe it would have been retrieved." He set down his pen. "The fraud claim is sustained. I am ordering a full review of Mr. Grayson's lending records by the County Finance Board, with authority to examine all notes issued in the past 15 years. He looked at the Finance Board president, who nodded once. Additionally, the duress claim filed against the transfer executed by Mr. Crowe is dismissed. The transfer stands. The room erupted. Not in celebration, or not only in celebration. In the complicated, multi-directional way that rooms erupt when something large has just shifted, and people are still deciding what it means for them. Clara heard voices, multiple conversations igniting at once, and she sat very still in the middle of it and let it happen around her. Hale's hand moved from the table to her arm, one brief press. "Miss Bellamy," he said. "Just that." She looked at him. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. "No," he said. "I filed papers. You built the case." She didn't have a response to that, so she accepted it, which was itself something new, the ability to accept being given credit for a thing she had actually done. Nathaniel was beside her before she had fully processed that the hearing was over. She felt him before she saw him, that particular quality of his presence that she had learned to recognize in the past 4 weeks without entirely meaning to. He sat down next to her in the vacating row, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then he said, "You looked at him, Grayson, when you said for an honest man." "You looked right at him." "I know," she said. "That was the moment," he said. The whole room felt it. She looked at her hands in her lap. "I've been not looking at him for 27 years, she said. Every man like him. Every room full of people who had already decided. I've been managing my own visibility my whole life, staying small enough to avoid the worst of it, staying useful enough to justify my presence." She paused. "I decided in that chair that I was done with that." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. It was a single word, and it carried the weight of everything he had been saying sideways for 4 weeks, and she heard all of it. "Nathaniel," she said, "yes, you said you'd ask me again when it was over." He went very still. "It's over," she said. The room was still clearing around them, voices, movement, the shuffle of a community reorganizing itself. Grayson had already gone, Cole beside him, both of them moving with the contained urgency of men who had a great deal to manage in the immediate aftermath of losing. The finance board president was speaking to Hale in the corner. Mrs. Alderton had found Dora and was saying something that made Dora press both hands over her mouth. May was standing near the back wall, watching her sister, and when Clara glanced at her, she gave the smallest nod, the same nod Dora had given in the trading post that first day, almost invisible, but Clara had always caught it. Nathaniel turned in his chair so he was facing her fully. He was not a man who performed moments. He was not going to make a speech or construct something elegant. She had known that about him for 4 weeks, and she was grateful for it. "Clara Bellamy," he said, "I would like to ask you plainly, with no arrangements attached and no tickets and nothing owed on either side, whether you would consider staying. Not on the ranch. With me." He paused. "Whether you would consider building something here that is yours as much as it is mine. In every way that matters." She looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, completely carefully, looking for the thing that was wrong. She didn't find one. She had not found one in 4 weeks of looking. "Yes," she said, "I would consider it." Something moved across his face that was not like anything she had seen there before. Not the contained, quiet expression she had come to read so carefully. Something more open than that. Something that had been held back a long time and had just been given permission. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I have conditions." "Of course you do," he said. And that was when he actually smiled, the full version, not the ghost of one, and it changed his face entirely in a way that she had not seen, and that she thought she might like to see again. "Frequently. The ranch accounts stay in both our names," she said. "The garden is May's. Dora gets to decide what she does next, no one decides it for her." "Agreed," he said. "All of it. And you don't ever try to protect me from something without telling me you're doing it." "Agreed," he said. "Though in my defense I did tell you about Grayson's methods as soon as you asked." "You did," she allowed. "That's in your favor. What else?" She thought about it. "Nothing else," she said. "For now." He reached out and took her hand. Not a gesture of possession, the wrong word entirely for this man, who she was quite sure did not think in terms of possession at all. A gesture of presence, of choosing, openly, with full knowledge of what was being chosen. She let him. More than that, she closed her hand around his, which was a decision she made with full awareness that she was making it. They sat like that in the emptying courthouse for a moment, just that. Just two people with their hands together, and the largest thing settled between them, and a great deal of ordinary life still ahead. Then Dora appeared in the aisle beside them, slightly red around the eyes in the way of someone who has been maintaining composure with significant effort, and she said, "Are we celebrating or are we sitting here holding hands while everyone waits for us outside?" Clara stood. She did not let go of Nathaniel's hand. "Both," she said. The months that followed remade the Crowe Ranch into something its own walls had not contained in years, a place where things were not merely maintained but tended, where the functional and the warm existed in the same rooms without apology. Clara hung curtains in the kitchen, not because Nathaniel asked, but because she wanted to, and because she had decided that wanting things was a practice she was going to take up with the same discipline she had applied to everything else. May's garden expanded into the south field and produced enough by fall that they were selling to 3 families in town. May had stopped being the smallest version herself and had started, cautiously, being something larger, asking questions, having opinions, making decisions about what to plant in the spring, with the focused authority of someone who had found the thing that was theirs. Dora left in October, not in sorrow and direction. She had been corresponding for 2 months with a woman in Billings who ran a school, and she left on a clear morning with her single trunk, and a look on her face that Clara recognized, because she had felt it herself. The look of someone walking toward something, rather than away from everything. She hugged Clara for a long time at the wagon and said, "You first, Clara. You always did everything first," and climbed up and didn't look back, because she was Dora and she never needed to. The Finance Board's review of Grayson's records took 11 weeks. What they found was not surprising to Clara, though the scale of it was larger than even she had estimated. 9 families over 14 years, modifications to 7 notes. 2 properties recovered under circumstances that the board ultimately referred to the territorial court as potentially criminal. Grayson settled 3 of the civil claims before they reached a judge quietly, without admitting anything, which was the move of a man who understood that the full examination of his records was a thing he could not survive publicly. He did not speak to Clara or Nathaniel after the hearing. He did not need to. The settlement payments and the restitution orders and the slow withdrawal of his influence from the county's financial life were their own conversation. Clara did not celebrate his collapse. She had never wanted his destruction. She had wanted the truth told and the families made whole, which were different things and took longer and mattered more. Calhoun's cousin recovered 22 acres. The unsigned letter woman whose name Clara eventually learned was Ruth Harmer got back the deed to her original property, which she promptly signed over to her son, who had been farming it all along and hadn't known the ground under his feet wasn't legally his. Ruth came to the ranch to thank Clara in person, in November, and sat in the kitchen and drank coffee and said, "I kept that note for 12 years because I couldn't make myself throw it away." "I didn't know why." "You knew something was wrong," Clara said. "I knew," Ruth said. "I just didn't know what to do about it alone." Clara refilled her coffee. "You weren't alone," she said. "You just hadn't found the room yet where the right people were standing." Nathaniel proposed in December. He did it the way he did everything, without performance, without engineering a moment, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday evening. They were at the kitchen table. She was going over the spring cattle figures. He was mending a piece of harness that had been giving him trouble. The lamp was lit. May was in the garden room pressing herbs. He set down the harness and said, "Clara." She looked up. "I'd like to marry you," he said. "I've thought about it since October, and I've decided that there's nothing I want more than to spend the rest of my life in rooms with you." He paused. "You don't have to answer now." She looked at him. She looked at the harness he'd set down, and the lamp between them and the kitchen that had curtains in it now, and the man who had set a boot right, with being asked and told the truth without rehearsed, and had stood in a courthouse and said, "The clearest decision I'd made in years," in a voice that did not waver. "I don't need time," she said. "You're certain, Nathaniel?" she said. I spent 27 years being told I wasn't worth choosing. I spent 4 weeks determining whether you were the kind of man I would choose if I had the choice. She held his gaze. I've been certain since November. He looked at her across the kitchen table, and the lamp between them made everything warm, and the Montana winter pressed against the windows, and the curtains she had put up held the cold out, and inside the house it was the specific warmth that comes. Not from the absence of difficulty, but from the presence of someone who has chosen you and keeps choosing you every ordinary day, without requiring you to be smaller than you are. November. The 14th, she said. You came in from the north pasture, and you were cold, and May gave you her scarf without being asked, and you wore it without embarrassment, and you thanked her, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She paused. I thought that's the man I want. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, May's scarf, she confirmed. He reached across the table and took her hand, and she gave it to him, and that was that. They married in February, on a clear cold morning, with the ground hard under snow and the sky the particular deep blue that only belongs to Montana winters. The Reverend, a different Reverend, from a neighboring town, recommended by Mrs. Alderton, performed the ceremony in the Crowe Ranch house with May and Calhoun and Boone as witnesses, and Mrs. Alderton herself, who had appointed herself the closest thing to family that the occasion required beyond the people who were already family. Clara wore her mother's dress, let out and taken in and altered in the places that needed altering until it fit the woman she actually was rather than the woman it had been made for. She had spent 2 evenings doing it by lamplight, with May handing her pins, and it had been the most significant sewing she had ever done. When Nathaniel took her hand at the front of the room, she looked at him and felt nothing that needed translating. Not wonder, not disbelief, not the careful hopeful uncertainty of someone who still couldn't trust that the good thing was real. Just the clean, solid, unambiguous feeling of a woman standing exactly where she chose to stand, with her eyes open, having chosen it fully. The Reverend said the words. They said the words back. And that was that. Spring came to the Crowe Ranch the way it always came to that valley fast, then all at once the way hard times had come once but would not be the defining weather anymore. The garden went in early because May had been planning it since January. The cattle weight was up. The south pasture had been expanded through a purchase Nathaniel and Clara had made together in March, reviewing the figures at the kitchen table the same way they had reviewed everything from the beginning together, completely, with no hidden ledgers between them. Families began coming to the ranch that spring, not formally, not in the organized way of town meetings or church visits, but in the particular organic way that communities move toward places that have earned their trust. A neighboring rancher's wife came for advice on the kitchen garden. A family from the East County came to buy 2 of May's herb starts. A young woman from town 19. With the specific expression of someone carrying a difficult situation she doesn't know how to name came one afternoon, and sat with Clara in the kitchen for 2 hours, and left looking different from how she had arrived. Clara did not know how to explain what she offered those women. It was not advice, exactly, and it was not counsel in any formal sense. It was something more like the thing she had needed and had not found until a man walked into a trading post and saw her standing straight in an impossible room. The experience of being looked at completely and found to be enough. She gave that, freely, without thinking of it as giving, because it had stopped feeling like something she was choosing to provide and had simply become the natural extension of who she was now that she was not required to be smaller than that. Nathaniel watched it happen and said nothing, except one evening in June when they were sitting on the porch in the long summer light. You've become the person this county needed. The county needed a lot of things for a long time, she said. Yes, he said, but you're the one who showed up. She looked out at the valley, the cattle in the pasture. The garden May was still working in the fading light, the mountains holding the last of the gold at their peaks. She thought about a cracked mirror, and a brown prairie dress, and a trading post, and a man who had looked at her first. Nathaniel, she said, I want you to know something. He looked at her. "I know that I was hard to reach," she said. "In the beginning. All of it, the watching, the testing, the conditions, the way I held everything at a distance while I checked it for the place where it would hurt me." She paused. "I want you to know that wasn't about you." "I know," he said. "It was about every room before yours," she said. "Every person who looked and decided. Every year of being managed and tolerated and assessed and found lacking before I opened my mouth." She looked at him. "I brought all of that in when I walked through your door." "I know," he said again. "And you waited," she said. "I wasn't waiting," he said. "I was watching. There's a difference." He looked at her. "Watching is something you do when you're interested. Waiting is something you do when you're patient. I was never patient with you, Clara." I was fascinated. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I love you," which was the first time she had said it entirely without conditions or caveats, or the protective hedging of a woman who had learned to insure herself against loss before the loss happened. He did not perform a reaction. He did not make a speech. He looked at her with the full, complete attention she had first felt in a trading post 6 months ago, and which had not diminished a single degree since, and said, "I know." "I've known for a while." "And you didn't say anything?" "I was waiting for you to say it," he said. "That one I was patient for." She shook her head. She almost laughed. She let herself laugh. They sat on the porch in the June light, and the valley was warm, and May was in the garden, and somewhere in Billings Dora was writing her next letter, and in town Ruth Harmer's son was farming his own ground, and the finance board was finishing its final report, and Walter Grayson was a diminished man in a county that had looked at his records in the light of day and made its judgment accordingly. And Clara Bellamy, Clara Crowe now. Though she kept both names because she had earned both, and she was done with the idea that a woman had to surrender what was hers, in order to take what she deserved, sat in the summer evening with her husband's arm around her and understood, fully and without reservation, what the cracked mirror had not been able to show her on all those difficult mornings. That she had never been the woman no one chose. She had been, from the very beginning, the woman worth waiting for, and the world had simply needed to become large enough and honest enough and brave enough to see what had always been standing right there in plain sight. The woman everyone had refused to choose became the woman an entire county could not imagine having done without. And that was not luck, and it was not rescue, and it was not the gift of a man who happened to walk through a door at the right moment. It was Clara Bellamy, exactly as she had always been, finally standing in a room that had finally learned to look.